Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important facts.
Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm super excited today. This is going to be one of the coolest conversations. I have Nick Zay. You can find Nick Zay on YouTube. He has an amazing TikTok channel, nick.zay. He is talking about the Gateway Experience, Dolores Cannon, Law of One. Sound familiar? We are totally on the same wavelength, and I'm super fascinated to find someone else that wants to talk about this stuff. So I was super excited when Nick said he would come on the show. So welcome to the Reality Revolution, Nick.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not as big on YouTube right now. I played the game, went TikTok first, and now we're outgrowing. I love YouTube. YouTube's my first love, but just playing the game. But I'm excited to talk, man. I'm really into the Law of One, have been for many years. It was like the first book that came to me along with You Are the Placebo with Dr. Joe Dispenza, and a lot of my knowledge, the beginning was kind of based on that. And then I branched out into Dolores Cannon and the declassified stuff, and it's great.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. And when I meet somebody, part of your interest in this is just a suspicion that there's something going on. There's a change in consciousness in our reality. When I talk to somebody that's interested in this stuff, that's what I usually get. Tell me about your experience and why you're interested in this stuff.
Yeah, I started to realize early on that reality was not what it seemed to be. And as I explored reality more, I found that there was distortions of truth and everything. And I just wanted to find out what's actually going on the planet, what's actually happening. And then you get to, like, I read Dr. Michael Newton's work with Journey of Souls and Dolores Cannon's Between Life and Death. And first of all, the Law of One just blew my mind wide open.
Yeah, no doubt
and
about it.
I'm still getting stuff from it every time that I get into it. And it was really just about the what if for me. I don't really want to leave anything on the table. I'm trying to let go of my own cognitive dissonance as much as I can to open myself up to what could really be. And that's really what I do, is just explore that.
Yeah, that's just part of it, is a sneaking suspicion that there's a lot more that I need to know and understand, at least from when I'm reading about it. But yeah, let's talk about the Law of One. I was excited that there was a description of reality and the world and the universe, the afterlife and the densities that made sense. Made sense. Part of it is the reason it resonates with me is it made sense. Now I've tried to go and in my sneaking suspicion, my debate self, and try to find when Carla was channeling this stuff, did it come from somewhere? And I've tried to go back, and there's some older books in different places where we see the beginnings of the discussion of Law of One. Have you had access to those yet? So that some of the old accounts of for UFOs and other discussions like that you kind of, there's some resonance with other material out there that kind of sort of justifies the Law of One maybe onto something.
Yeah, the origin story kind of the Law of One. Yeah, for me, from my understanding of it is that Carla didn't really want to channel,
right?
Didn't really want to do it, and then they just kept experimenting, and she liked Don, and then they kind of were like, all right, let's figure this out. And it wasn't an easy thing. And to me, when you think about the validity, because channeling is a tough one, it always is for me, because as someone comes from a logical background, I'm like, oh man, it could all be BS. It literally could all be BS, but you don't know.
That's always going to be your thought, at least a little bit, right?
Right. And I think it's good to have skepticism to some respect.
Right.
And so as I come at the Law of One, I started to see that what they were saying was corroborated by many other sources. And, they started to talk about the physics of Dewey Larson with space-time and time-space, and that really intrigued me. And so I got into his reciprocal system, and I really studied it. I'm like, wow, this makes so much sense. So when I saw originally the Law of One, and I saw that they did it with a Bible, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. They had to have everything in a very particular position in order to get this thing. And that's something you never saw anywhere else. So those differences kind of made me think, well, that could have something to it. And then she went on to write the Law of One 101, The Choice, which is an excellent read as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Carla was just an amazing genius to me. I have so much respect for even her writings and everything that she did. But yeah, I think the Bible was kind of tuning for her in particular. And as I've gotten super fascinated with the Quo material, and in the Quo material, they were asking, there's this place, this angle that Carla had to be to get this information, like a stream of information. Has that changed? And then Quo said, now it's just the whole earth. Before it was that they had to line it up at a certain angle. And we've reached the point now where we're always in the same stream that she was tuning into then, right?
wow. I mean, I feel like we're evolving, and along with that, it looks like the earth is evolving too, and that's what they talk about, right?
So what is your perspective of what that means? Does that, I seem to think, and I'll put it into words and riff on what I'm going to say, right? Like when we talk about moving into another density, it's not a dimension. Some people, I think there's a different, I think that the Dolores Cannon and her, as you talked about on your video, and in 5D and fourth density, they can be the same and different at the same time. Density, I think, is more of a talking about the complexity of the light particle that's available for consciousness at that density is what I kind of get from it. And so it's a matter of, I used to think it was density like we understand like matter, but really it's a density in the complexity of information. I suddenly have access to way more information than I did before. It's like going to the next classroom level, and it's not. And I think that as we move into fourth density and access this complexity, that the dimensional capabilities then become available as other dimensions, such as the fifth dimension, then becomes a part of that knowing in that particle, right? Does that make sense to you? I mean, density, I think, is misunderstood, right?
Definitely is, especially when you got everybody talking about 5D and nobody knows what fourth density is. And everybody's like, where, what's going on here? That's why I did that video explaining the difference between Dolores Cannon's 5D and Law of One's fourth density.
Right.
So an interesting way to think about it that I've kind of came to me was levels of unity. And if unity is closer together, then as we increase in unity, then you can imagine, as you said, the information or the particles are going to be closer together. So the fourth density would just be where the particles are closer together, which would therefore be the opposite of the way that we think of density as matter. And that's something that I wrote about in my book, with that a lot of people think of rock as a higher density. But when we're talking about consciousness and the way the Law of One says it, it's actually that things like light are actually the higher density. So it's actually the reciprocal in the Law of One system. So a higher density would be like a light body compared to a physical body. And it kind of rings true to, I don't know if you've studied Richard Rudd's work with the gene keys, and he did the 7 sacred bodies of Corpus Christi. He talked about how there's 7 bodies or 7 planes of existence. It's like the same thing as the Law of One.
Right.
And I found that that's really interesting that they combined in that too. And another way to think about it would just be water pressure, that as you go down in the ocean, there's different water pressure throughout the ocean, and certain bodies can only handle certain pressures. So that's going back to the reciprocal system of Dewey Larson. He basically said there's space-time and time-space, 3 dimensions of time in one, and then 1 dimension of space. Then the reciprocal, it goes 3, 1, then 3, 1. You just change from 3 space dimensions to 3 time dimensions in the reciprocal. And so if those are the dimensions we're working with, when we're talking about densities, we're not switching dimensions necessarily. We might in some, if we're talking about pre-incarnative, like Dolores Cannon, that might be in time-space versus space-time. But in essence, it's just, to me, you can think about it as pressure or unity, that kind of thing.
Yeah, at time space, I had a hard time understanding the difference. And there was that part in the Law of One where they asked Ra, what happened to our tape? Why did it, mess up right there? And they're like, oh, this is what happened. It got crinkled. They knew exactly what had happened in that little moment in time. And you get this idea, it's almost like they're in some sort of VR and they can play through anything that's already happened, becomes frozen and eternal for those beings. And they can go back into any moment and totally see everything that happened down to the smallest minute quantum detail. those beings move more and more from, from space to space time, or vice versa, right? So space is moving like time. That's the only difference, is that time moves for us, but in the opposite, space is moving instead of time, which is still, they're dealing with we deal with time and they're dealing with space, right?
Yeah, an easy way to visualize this. I'm not saying that it's completely correct and all of that, but going back to one of my favorite movies of all time, Interstellar, in the end, just spoilers. If you haven't watched Interstellar right now, what are you doing?
Right.
But he went into the black hole, and you can imagine that that's an analogy for going into time space. And when he moves through inside of the black hole, he's actually moving through what we can consider space, but then you can see that he's looking at all of these different realities, and they're all kind of different, and then he kind of picks one, and he's kind of messing with time being outside of it, but you can kind of make little tweaks. And that's how I kind of see it, that they can see all the different potential realities, kind of like in quantum theory, the many worlds theory, which I've listened to your meditations on quantum jumping, which are fantastic, by the way. And that's how I kind of see it, that they have access to all these realities and they can see kind of how it is.
Right. So as we move through density, I think we move more and more into that eternal present, moment that they're in, where time is kind of frozen almost. And even Ra you get the impression Ra doesn't really know time well. It had to correct itself a couple times. He was like, in the last channeling, we were wrong by so and so years, because they're drifting in a totally different concept of time when they try to relate it back. So I found that interesting. What is your impression of the other channeled material? Because some of that's still coming through Carla and the Quo, Hatan, Latui material. Have you gotten a chance to read that stuff, and what's your impression of that?
So I got what was in her book, The Law of 101, The Choice. That's all I've really dived into in the newer stuff.
Right.
I feel like I've had so much to kind of break down in the year that I've been really getting into it. I mean, I started talking about the Law of One about a year ago now, and that was originally on TikTok. And then I moved and did a bunch of stuff on YouTube with it too. But I found that there's so much to talk about and covering all the different things that I haven't gotten a chance to get into it yet.
I was in the same place. The reason I mentioned it to you, I'm excited for you then, if you haven't accessed it, because what's happening with the Quo material, if you remember the story for the Law of One, it goes crazy. Don kills himself. There's negative beings attacking them. They're talking about it in the channeling. What should we do? How do we deal with this negative being that, and you get this idea that negative polarity is trying to attack and stop the channeling. And so Ra was horrified, right? Like they were like, we can't believe that this would happen. So in conjunction with Hatan, who's in a lower density, but still above ours, and Latui, who's still above ours, they kind of created a principle together. And then as long as Carla could channel through them, they would all kind of come together, and then they would channel in the lower densities through into Carla. Well, she had to be holding someone's hand. As long as they did that, and she could ground the energy, she could deliver much better channelings. And they're not like lawyerly as much. Like Ra is very careful about every word. They're more they flow a little bit better. The channeler is conscious, and she was in a unconscious state. So the channeler, there's still the channeler's filter, so you get a little bit of that. But it's fascinating because they're in the same place you and I are at. And they've already been exposed to the Law of One, and they're starting to live it and think about it like we are, because that was in 85, 86. So you and I, we've really only been exposed to this for a couple of years. Of course, I've talked about it in hundreds of episodes, but I know that's what's happening to you, is you can't stop talking about it once you understand the Law of One and you start thinking about it in relation to these other theories. And they were doing that too. And they were asking, okay, what did you mean by this? What did you mean by this? Tell me more about this. And that's what you're getting with the Quo material, is the advancement of these ideas. And they talk about every topic you can imagine. And Don Juan Matus and Carlos Castaneda, Swedenborg, they talk about everything. They ask because any question can be asked, right? A lot of times they're going to say law of confusion, sorry. But still, I find that stuff fast. So I can't wait for you to read it, right?
Yeah, now I'm gonna get into it.
But what we got to figure out, and if you can find out as a researcher, they're obviously using some ritual to access Quo. And they haven't really, they kind of talk about the ritual to access Ra in the channelings. They have a specific thing that was very specific to them that they did, which is why I always laugh when I see other people are saying that they're channeling Ra, right? But we are in, you know, we don't have to tune in anymore. So maybe I'm wrong, right? But
who knows?
Yeah, but the channeling is scientific too. I don't know. It feels like they had a scientific way of going about it.
Yeah, that's what attracted me more than a lot of other things, was that they talked about science, they talked about history, and if we look at the history that we've uncovered, and I mean like not the mainstream history, but I mean like Graham Hancock,
right?
And them, he's gotten really deep into what's actually going on. You'll find that a lot of those things line up with what the Law of One has to say, and so for me, I've based my understanding. It's not as though I'm like, oh, the Law of One is the only truth. It's like, no,
right,
it's been kind of said that it, like the pyramids or power plants, like that's a really interesting concept. Let's see how that could actually be true, because they were really big on pyramids in the Law of One. And so it's just kind of, for me, it's like, oh, this could be true. Let's take a look. It seems like there's a lot of evidence that this does have some validity to it, and then I kind of roll with it. But to go back and answer your question, I don't know if I ever did. What does the evolution of consciousness kind of look like? Have you ever studied the work of Dr. David Hawkins?
Oh yeah, I love him.
Okay, so
David Hawkins here, man.
got it right behind me. You can probably see Letting Go in the yellow book right there. But yeah, I've studied his work massively along the way with the Law of One. Those have been like my two. Those are the two that have really guided me the most, I would say. And when I think about the evolution of consciousness, I'm seeing it basically as the scale. It says that we move from emotional frequencies, and this is kind of the same thing that Dolores Cannon says. We move into the frequencies of love. She's very general. But with Dr. Hawkins, it's like we're moving from, I think we were at Courage 204 when he calculated it, and that was like 2004, 2005. And now we're moving into neutrality and then willingness, and that there's a percentage of the population that's holding up the rest through their own kind of thing. And that's why I always tell people, service to others is not about only what you do. You don't have to go do charity. You don't have to go do these things. You can, that's great. But it's about your heart, because one of the biggest tenets of the Law of One is that, I remember there's a specific question that was, how do you stop reincarnating over and over? And I'm generalizing, but the answer was, you activate the green ray center. And when you do that, reincarnation ceases to be automatic. And so to me, I'm not trying to stop reincarnation necessarily, but that's just a big indicator of, well, what's the thing that's going to help us to learn what we came to learn, you know? And I'm big on the universe being a game, because that's the name of my podcast. So that's what I always talk about. And to me, it's like this level of the game, you can reach enlightenment, because I also talk about in Law of One that if you reach enlightenment, then that's like, you're done. You don't even have to continue playing. That's just one way. Or there's the harvest, a 75,000 year cycle, which I'm sure you're aware of.
Right.
And so there's all these different concepts, but it's pretty clear that it's just be nicer, be more nice than you're not, 51%, just be 51% or more. And so to me, that's how you complete the game. But it's also to me about enjoying the game. How can I get to a place where, like, the biggest thing for me, like in my bio, it's linking awakening consciousness and self-realization. And I'm like, how can I help others to stop suffering? And I really feel like that's where I fit, at least for this moment. That's a big part of what I enjoy helping people with. It's almost like going within yourself and just observing and becoming awareness. I know it's so cliche in today's day and age, but there's a level of when you're able to contemplate why you do what you do and why you have these thought patterns and these thinking patterns that you're identified with, then you can start to see that, oh, well, I'm actually outside of those. And kind of, that's like the first step, at least.
It's so true that you see the nature of the game after reading the Law of One, understanding there's this duality, service to self or service to others. Suddenly you choose which side of the game that you want to play, Jedi or Sith, right? And then
pretty much.
suddenly you're presented catalysts as if in a game. These catalysts are impossible to be random, that suddenly occur. Okay, you're suddenly given this choice in this moment. Or am I going to serve myself? I can easily do so, and it'll totally help me out. Or I can serve others, and what's going to happen next? And you're constantly being given these little moments in the game, and then it plays and branches off, like, read your own adventure, right? Like,
pretty much. That's all there is to do. Just play the game.
Right.
People are like, I don't want to play the game anymore. I'm like, what else is there to do?
Right.
If you've got something better to do, let me.
Right. No, it's an amazing game.
Yeah.
It's an amazing game, right? Is it a Black Mirror type situation where time is consolidated? So when we play the game, we're going to come out and it only lasts like 20 minutes.
That's like the Rick and Morty episode where he goes into the arcade and he plays as the character, and then he comes back out and he realizes, like, oh, he's making it this far. He's taking the character wherever nobody's ever been this far. He comes back out. It's like, oh my god, maybe it's possible.
Yeah,
I think in an infinite universe, there's a potential universe where that's the case. Yeah.
Now, I was just reading a lecture by Neville Goddard where he's saying the real you is sort of sitting on the couch watching. And just making, like, he had a vision that his real version of himself was sort of sitting watching, and then it's just all, he calls it a play, right? And a lot of times you get that's kind of the analogy that Ra uses, that we're in this play. And I prefer the game because then I can actively choose in the game. The play means that my role is already set and I just have to be the actor, right?
Right. That's the limited free will. Even
Meaning
more
that,
limited,
right? That's what I do, like the game model,
playing
so much. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the role is limited. If we consider it like a play, I want to consider it like a game, like Grand Theft Auto. I can just go out to the edge of the island. I can do whatever I want, and it's not, even though I'm still stuck in the Matrix, which is still, we were limited by that. I still have a choice. It's not a play, right?
Yeah, and I did specifically look up key terms for Law of One to see if they did call it a game, and there is a part where they do call it a game sphere. So,
yeah,
that's in there. So, yeah, I prefer the game analogy too, just because I grew up playing video games and I saw all of the similarities between games. Like, there was a controller that you would use, and I just started to imagine, well, if I'm using a mouse and keyboard or an Xbox controller to play this game, who's to say that this isn't a controller? Because I started to notice that there was a separation between the thoughts, and I was not the thinker. That was kind of the first thing for me. I'm not actually thinking these thoughts because I was able to witness the thoughts in a way where I wasn't actively, like, I realized the difference between the conscious and subconscious, essentially. And then I started to realize more aspects in my life, and not in a completely ungrounded way. I feel like I understand how the nature of society and the so-called matrix, that it is the way that it is, but I also see that it is that way because it's interesting, because it's the roller coaster. I know another part in Law of One, it talks about how you came here to get lost. So I've always kind of taken that and just been like, okay, I surrender. I don't know. It's almost as though a big realization for me was to realize that a point of the game is to literally not know. So
right.
I don't need to know it all.
But an important thing that I struggled with and I wanted to know, I've talked about on my podcast, is the 75,000 year thing is no joke, right? They're saying you got to start all over. Was I at 51% by the time December 21st, 2012? I get the impression now from the Quo material when they've asked later that it wasn't, that, they acted like that's the deadline. And even there's a book where Carla even says that, you better choose now. This is your, the time is running out. Back 2012, I wasn't even close to at a place where, I even understood, I was lost in my unconsciousness. Right. But you could easily read that material saying, yeah, time ran out, the 75,000 year cycle. I think it's at the end of our lifetime in this incarnation. It's, if we're living through this, we still are going through that process. we have until the end of this lifetime. So at least the most of the people. But imagine, you blew it here and you have to start on another planet, probably doing 75,000 years more, right? That's a long time. But that number, 75,000, we've seen it in a lot of other places. Dolores Cannon, there's even in some occult literature, in some other channeled works, that number does come up. It is a thing, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, and sure.
What do you think has happened over the last 75,000 years?
Humans messing around.
But clearly, like you love to talk about, we clearly have other advanced civilizations during this 75,000 year cycle, perhaps several advanced civilizations that have died out and started over.
Yeah. So what's really been happening? I'm not too familiar with, I'm not going to get into this today because I'm still researching it, but there's a whole Anunnaki thing. But other than that, I feel like I'm more adept in the area of Atlantis and Lemuria and these type civilizations that have been around. And so to me, what's been happening is society and humans have been coming up and going down. They've been riding the roller coaster, but there's been a call for the positive and the negative. And it seems as though the negative has kind of, as far as we know, who knows? Atlanteans could be on other planets right now. I mean, I don't know for sure. Right. But from what we know on Earth, that the negative has caused the downfall of these civilizations in some way. So for this one, it feels like we got this time around. To me, at least, it feels pretty solid. Now, as far as the ancient civilizations, when the Law of One talks about the Atlanteans, it's pretty wild. Just as, because another type of video that I do on the side besides the Law of One, I'm not only talking about Law of One.
Of course.
I do a lot of truth hidden in plain sight type videos. And I did one on Aquaman. Okay. And a lot of people are like, Aquaman, okay, buddy. But if you look at the scene where Atlantis sinks in the Aquaman movie, it's exactly like Dolores Cannon's in her convoluted universe. She talked about how she regressed someone who was a part of the Atlantean Council, and they were there, and it was the same thing that happened. There was an energy source, and they were messing with it, and they basically caused the downfall of the civilization. And the Law of One is more along the lines of they were creating negative life forms, and they didn't want to perfect themselves. They wanted to start to create life, and it distorted them negative in that way, and there's more to it. But so it seems as though our society is kind of at that, if we take that perspective and we look at our society, it seems as though there's people in our society that want to do the same thing. They kind of want to create life forms instead of alleviate suffering, figure out how we can live harmoniously. And it's very apparent that there's these two. So to me, as we close this cycle, another big point in the Law of One is that right now, the dark is getting darker and the light is getting lighter. So you're going to see that polarization much more clearly now.
It's fascinating. And everything that Dolores Cannon's also, just to say, has people channeling saying they were playing with these life forms and creating different life forms. Interesting channeling from Quo. Carla, they asked about dolphins. Dolphins were from genetic experimentation of Atlantis, which I thought
really
was, right, because they have a larger brain, they're fourth density, they're most likely of fourth density, and maybe they're not anymore, but they were a product of those genetic experimentations, right?
So who knows? Who knows what else is lurking out there?
So yeah, but I love to talk about it. And the other thing that I'm so fascinated by, a couple of things. We'll start with Maldek. Maldek, there's some. I found some other literature that talks about Maldek. That it was a star in our sky. What are your vibes on that? I mean, I found in multiple other literature that talk about Maldek, but it's interesting. Maybe it's just one dude had an idea and it sort of spread, and maybe it wasn't real, but maybe the asteroid field is that other planet.
So I just got to say, it's interesting to me because just going into some stuff about me real quick, I was not one that wanted to be on TikTok first. Like I was like, let me just get on YouTube. I really want to be on YouTube. Like that's my thing. I want to make like professional quality videos. Then I figured, okay,
Oh,
well, I'm starting out in this time. This is what I guess I got to do for now.
and they
So,
are. I totally recommend everybody check out your channel for sure.
oh, good, thanks, man. So I say that because I think a lot of times people think TikTok guys are like, okay, buddy, because TikTok seems to be like a kid platform, but there you'd be surprised at the millions and millions of people that are awakened on that platform.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to the reason I'm mentioning this is because I put out a video talking about this exact topic and the amount of the amount of people that were salt about the asteroid belt potentially being a planet that it's pretty. It looks like it very much some evidence that this thing might be a planet, and be like, no way. There's this scientific explanation for this to be this, and I'm like, okay, well, this could be the case as well. I'm throwing this out there, and so to me, there's different. I've listened to other people talk about how there was the different types of, I don't even know if they call them families. There's different bloodlines. It's kind of like if you think about Cryon. Is it Cryon? Yeah. Cryon from Superman. This is kind of a weird analogy. Right. But if you watch the Superman movies at the beginning of Man of Steel, it's like that too. That there's certain bloodlines that are a part of the thing. Like they're the leaders. And it's kind of weird that that's in there. And it's like, is what happening on that planet in Man of Steel? Is that what they're trying to tell us happened to Maldek?
Exactly. Yeah.
So I noticed that, and I was like, I'm not trying to live my life through movies by any means, but I'm kind of seeing.
It's part of the game, right?
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I'm not like looking at movies and saying this is the right. truth. So when I found that, I was like, wow, this is really interesting because I really liked the Man of Steel, the first one, and so. Then with the Law of One, it tells us that it was a nuclear war that destroyed that Mars, essentially, because Maldek is Mars, from my understanding. That actually, Maldek is the asteroid belt. Maldek is the asteroid. Sorry, I got that confused for a sec. So Mars, I think, was a whole different thing. So in terms of, my bad there. Sometimes
no, it's cool. No,
a lot of information with the Law of One. So, but Maldek, I feel like through my research, there's been many of talks in many different cultures. If you look back, that there's an extra planet in some of the Egyptian stuff. It's kind of weird how if you look at their drawings on some of their hieroglyphs, they have some astrology type stuff going on, and there's another planet there. And why is that there? I don't know.
So yeah, the episode I did, I found another dude that had channeled stuff, and they're saying it's referred to in the Bible. When they use the word tongue and they talk about it in the sky, it's the events that they talk about in the sky. One of the things that happens in the Bible, there's like a huge plague that comes out of nowhere, and that was just from the explosion of Maldek. For about a year, they lost everything, and there was no explanation why this crazy event happens in the Bible, and it was the explosion. There's some other things that we can link to it. So, but another thing I'm fascinated by is Saturn, because that's where the Council of Nine. And of course, if you go down the rabbit hole of Saturn, where the rings are in conjunction with the moon, what is happening with Saturn? You get the feeling that Saturn's above all the polarities. They're aware of the negative and positive, and they're letting it play out. Let the game play out. They're just kind of monitoring the game. They're the game manager, kind of monitoring to the game, right?
All right, let's just bring more references in because I feel like visualizations always help me. It kind of reminds me of the TVA and Loki. Those that have seen Loki, it's kind of like the TVA, but almost just for maybe there's variant stuff going on that we don't know about, but more along the lines for this right now that they're making sure the Earth has its free will respected, and that's an interesting concept because people will say, well, there's all these negative entities here. How can there be free will if they're all doing their thing? And the Law of One is clear that people called for the negative. That the negative are here out of the free will of the people that called them. So it's not as though it's not being respected.
But there's some manipulation. It feels like the negative is playing legalistic games to try to get in there and following the letter of the law to the very least. Like obviously free will is being violated by the negative, but they're just like skirting the law to be allowed to. Doesn't it you get the feeling that that's what's going on?
Yeah, and another part. Now I'm just going to keep quoting Law of One because we're already in it. There's another part where it talks about is the Empire from Star Wars the
Right, yeah.
is that what's happening here? And they're like, yeah, pretty much. It's an analogy for what's going on. And then there was another part where they were talking about, well, why don't the entities or the negative entities just all land, show themselves, and once they land, then they'll just take over. And I've if I'm remembering correctly, the response was something along the lines of it would be a gamble, because if they have a massive karmic consequences for doing that, but if they were to take over the entire planet at one time, then they would add it to the literally they said galactic empire or something like that.
So like they've probably done that before, and there was a rebellion, and they've learned to play the game. They're good at it. They've done it on other planets. Get the feeling that they don't necessarily want a certain rebellion. If they can manipulate through the media and other things, it's all good, right?
Yeah, if they can make you want to be
right.
You want to be negative, they're like
You have to choose.
They're almost like they're like, hey, we're positive, but actually we're negative underneath. So you should want this thing because it's positive for you, because service to self,
Right.
and it will help in your survival. So your survival is the most important. And I think we've very much been seeing that play out. And so the negative, it really inverts. If you look at the levels of consciousness, it inverts and gets power from shame, guilt, fear in these lower levels. So that's kind of what we're seeing. They kind of make you try to want that because it's comfortable, and they're appealing to your survival, primitive animal type behaviors of the body to try and get you to be like, yeah, okay, I'll take it. And then there's a lot of us that are like, nah, chief, not this time.
No, there's on many levels the sort of manipulations that are going on when you're awakened to this after you read the Law of One and you see the levels of manipulation. It makes me think that I'd like to go before the Council of Nine and argue my case that our free will has been infringed beyond what would be an acceptable level for a planet coming into the end of third density. I'll argue my case. Bring it on. You know what I'm saying?
All right, what's the case? Let's hear it.
I just think that, that what we've been through with the negative density, control of the media, food source, electricity source, for many, they're never really exposed. They're constantly being programmed from birth to be of service to self. The system, everything about it. So for you to escape that, it's a near impossibility unless you're at a certain level. And they've even taken education to a certain level. So you're not even educated to a point where you could reach that level. Many can't even read. And so the system on appears from an outside source. Yeah, they still have a chance to, move positive, but the odds are quite against it in most cases. The system's been created it to that point, right?
It's tough, man. It's tough because I see so many people around the world being like, okay, we're not doing this. And I've seen so many people kind of, instead of get lowered down by the negative is almost the catalyst that allows them to really understand what's happening. And so without that, it would almost be, there'd be a sense of, am I really experiencing the depth that is available by the one infinite creator? Am I really experiencing the depth of what could be? Can we make it out of this game? It's not saying that this game is easy by any means, but yeah, I think Dolores Cannon was the one that said this is the hardest game in the universe.
And probably the hardest would be to make it on service to self. You got to go 95%. Think about that. 95% of your life has to be serving the self. There's going to be, that's like 23 hours out of the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so, I always tell people you can't do it by accident.
No, yeah, there's a part of you that knows you got to reach this level, this percentage. Yeah, I've seen a few people maybe, but even Hitler didn't make it, right? So
right, exactly. So don't get all heated that your boy's negative yet. It's just you're probably going to keep reincarnating unless you're consciously like, I'm going to do the worst things possible to everyone and myself, and then maybe you could get there. But if you're just struggling with reality, if you've chosen like, I want this nice car, and you've like manipulated people to get things, you're probably not even close to that. And one of the big things that I've been very big on is that a really important quote that I feel like is often missed, and I actually just filmed a video on this, was that the question was asked something along the lines of, Don asked, and he was actually wrong when he asked, well, if people are moving through life and they've chosen the negative, does that mean that they have to go further than the people who haven't chosen? And they were like, this is incorrect. The people that have chosen the negative are actually far better off at getting to the positive than the ones that haven't chose at all or anything. And I think the exact wording was, the ones that are helpless are the ones that are stuck in patterns without realizing, or very, very close to that. Right. So when you do, my point is that when you do things that you feel like are negative, and you might have throughout your life when you didn't know, like you were saying earlier, you were unconscious. I was unconscious for many years. It's not as though that didn't teach you to learn, because the whole point is to learn and evolve and to see through, and then to be able to choose. And if you have that ability, then you have much more power than someone like people I know, like my parents, right? There's people that are very close to me that are just stuck. They don't realize that they're causing their own suffering. They're stuck in these patterns, behaviors. And it's not until you can see that, if you're aware, if you've become aware, that's such a huge step,
Yeah. It's true. How do you imagine the service to self worlds are like? They're entire worlds where, I guess Genghis Khan is a shipping clerk, right?
I imagine it exactly like the movie Riddick. You ever seen that one?
Right. I've seen that for sure.
Yeah. Where Riddick is just basically at the top of the hierarchy, the end of the movie. He just tries to get on top, right, without a spoiler. And so that's how I see it. It's just like a hierarchy. It's
people knifing each other in the back all the time, like a Game of Thrones. Like nobody can trust anybody, right? Yeah.
King of the Hill. It's just King of the Hill. And it's constant watching your back, constant fear, constant. I mean, if that's what you want to do, then that's available, but you can't do it forever. I mean, you can do it forever to a certain extent, because in a potentially infinite universe with potential infinite things, infinite time, you could possibly get stuck forever doing it. You can't say that it's not an infinite universe, but I would like to think that if we look at the material 6 density, you can only go so far. If you continue to progress negative, you have to drop the polarization to join in unity.
Right. Which is fascinating. And there's that part where they were talking about what would have happened to Carla when she was being attacked by the negative. And she could have got thrown into negative space. And then she would have had to go out the whole cycle all the way through the densities in negative space. I was really interested in that part. Almost like, thank God Don saved her. And there's the feeling that they were trying to save Carla from that happening, like being sent to hell, essentially. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude, that book is kind of like a movie in itself, the things that happened. And it's just wild.
Somebody's got to make the Law of One movie about them doing it, right? Somebody's going to, on Netflix, somebody's going to do a mini series or something telling the story of this happening to them, right?
If I get the resources, man, I love cinematography, videography.
I would love to.
Good setup. I'd love to actually do it myself if I could.
This is a call right now. If there's somebody out there that wants to produce a movie, Nick and I will do it. We got this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. We could definitely get something good going on there, because it's also the afterword is wild how it continues, and then it gets into the quote stuff, and it's not as though I thought for a while when I first got into it that, it's just these books. It's just these 3 books, 4 or 5 books, actually, including the other personal material. But no, it continues on. And there's this whole other thing.
35 years of channeling beyond the Law of One book, almost every week. That's insane.
That's dedication.
I've only scratched the surface of it and sharing it on my podcast. I just think it's absolutely amazing. Maybe in some cases, I think that when we channel, it's giving us permission to reveal spiritual information that's deep within us already in some cases. And so even if that's what this is, even for those doubters out there that say, I don't believe it, forget about the information itself is so powerful and resonant. It doesn't matter if it was channeled or not, in my own opinion.
Yeah, I'm always about, I'm not telling you what to believe. I don't really care what you believe. I'm just
Right.
sharing what I believe to be evidence of that there might be something going on here. So for me, there's some pretty big evidence that reality could be this way. I have not found a in my opinion, I have not found a more profound explanation, and not just profound as in wow, but detailed. The amount of
Yeah.
detail, the basically PhD level wording of the
Yeah.
law of one, and how it describes things that I couldn't even imagine, and it just blows my mind. And there's so much more that we didn't
So
even talk
much.
about. We probably hit on 2% of the law of
Yeah.
one.
So the other thing I just wanted to talk about was, your impressions of the gateway experience. I read that on the channel, and it's my feeling is, that's a long time ago. They're way past. They're dealing with, if there is a true governmental division that was honest intelligently about how they were researching this. That stuff's just kindergarten. The stuff in the gateway experience, right?
Yeah, and then people
They're
are like,
remote viewing, like,
nah. You know
right.
what I mean? People are like, nah, now to that. And you look at what the Monroe Institute is doing now and some of the things that people are saying, and it's like, okay, like they're 40, 50 years ahead of what they knew back then.
Right. So there's got to be just an amazing investigative services, CIA type groups that are remote viewing that know everything. And on both sides, Putin's got a group that's remote viewing and knows his future, is probably playing games with his future. A lot of times you see world leaders making decisions. Clearly they had foreknowledge, you know what I'm saying? They're doing
Mhm.
crazy stuff. And it's because of this advanced level of consciousness that's like a technology, right?
Yeah, the biggest trick that they can play is to make you believe that the most powerful things are not true, that the most advanced things that we know are not true, that the knowledge that may be accessible, like I bet you they've done a study on the law of one and they just haven't declassified it. Like there's, to me, in my mind, we just don't know what they think of it, but I mean we don't need to know, but it's what we experience as our reality through all the patents that have disappeared, through all the things that we don't really have access to now, that were possibly like water powered cars, crystal technology, magnetic engines, all of these different type of inventions. In my mind, theoretically, these things are all happening, but we just don't have access to them, and that can go back to Roswell and the Montauk chair and the Orion cube and all of these other
Yeah.
things that, that we haven't talked about as well. But in terms of the declassified stuff, yeah, the declassified documents say the same thing as many different religions do, but they just word it differently. And I
Exactly.
started to see the very much correlation between what Hindu type material might say or Buddhist. And now it's not all the same, of course, because each thing has its own distortions. And I believe even the declassified stuff has its own distortions. So as we contemplate the declassified stuff, and I'm still doing that, by the way, I've only gotten through like 4 because I've decided, you know what, I want to go really, really deep into every single one. The last one I did, I linked the transcendental meditation to Dr. Joe Dispenza's work because it's kind of clear that the Kundalini stuff is very much related to what Dr. Joe does.
Absolutely.
And one of the most wild things that I've discovered so far, and in the third episode, or the third, if you went to number 3 on it in the actual document with the transcendental meditation, they say that you can have a Kundalini experience just by there being a 4 to 7 hertz frequency of your air conditioning, of your car, or something like that. That's what causes the seemingly random Kundalini awakenings. And what, like, what could these agencies and different 3-letter things be discovering where they could just have somebody come in and just be like, all right, we're going to expose you to these frequencies and you're going to experience the nature of reality. Like it takes Buddhist monks 40 years, but nah, here you go. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah. It's fascinating. I just want to know. I want to know everything. I don't want, if I want somebody to tell me that what's really going on, because I realize I probably might not know, at least during this incarnation, some of the cool stuff that's happening out there. What I'm really most fascinated by, and I want to write a novel about this. I've tried, and is the thought wars, which talked about in the Law of One, and they even ask more in the quote material, that clearly in even up through fourth to fifth density, there's a group of people that are participating in a thought war with the negative, but the positive don't really like to go to war because they don't believe in any sort of conflict. But there's a point where it's like that's enough, right? So there's this there's a thought war going on, but it's probably something we can't conceive of.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, they talk about how a lot of the action that's taken by higher density beings are telepathic. So if you're doing things, and that's something that Carla talked about in Law of One, 101, the choice, was that negative entity attacks are still happening and will happen to you if you pursue this. If you pursue to really understand, they know. They know who actually gets it and who doesn't get it, because they're outside, like we talked about. They're outside of space-time. They're in time-space, so they can kind of, at least the higher density ones, and they've kind of got lackeys that can go around and do things. So that's why when people talk about a law of attraction and this type stuff, I'm not always keen to say your vibration is the only thing, because we don't know how much outside influence, such as pre-incarnative decisions that could have been made, or negative entities that could have caused things to happen. That's why I'm like, one of my not perfect, but one of the examples I always use when I talk about that law of attraction isn't the full truth, is think about Jesus. Did he attract being put on the cross through his own vibration? I'm like, no, there's no way.
Exactly.
So there's things that happen outside of what we can comprehend. So that's why you don't attract everything. You have a massive amount of power to create the reality you prefer, for sure. But there are still things that you didn't do wrong in order for this to happen. It kind of takes that guilt away,
But at the same time, your vibration at a certain level, anger, hate, fear, you're going to attract negative entities. They're going to get into your, they may not want to be around. It's in a loving sort of atmosphere, at least in my own experience. If I create a sort of bubble of energy that's, loving, I don't sense those negative energies as much. So you still attract those entities as well. But you're right. There's other dynamics going on. It's not as simple as what we're saying. I totally agree with that. I wanted to ask you said in a couple of days, you're going to have your new book out, 10 Secrets of Awakening.
That's right.
I can't wait to read it. Tell me more about it.
So 10 Secrets of the Awakening, I actually do have a whole part on the Law of One in it. But 10 Secrets of Awakening is my best, taking all of the experience that I've had in my life and putting it all into one book to give you the most powerful, what I believe to be transformative type experience in one area, with what I believe to be the most practical understandings. Like, I talk about Law of One, but I don't talk about everything. I just talk about what are the things that you need to know. And so for me, 10 Secrets of Awakening is, this is what I feel like is really important. And so what I focus on a lot is understanding the subconscious mind. And Neville Goddard is a big inspiration. I shouted him out in the book, and Dr. Joe Dispenza and many of these other teachers, where I've kind of taken from, I'd say, a good 10 to 15 different, and kind of formed my own understanding of what's going on here and what's going on within you. Because as I said before, one of my biggest goals is to help others to see and alleviate their suffering. And so a big portion of the book is dedicated to that. So we're talking about the subconscious mind, a law of attraction type stuff, and kind of giving you the greater version, or the more bird's eye view of all these decisions, pre-incarnative decisions, and how that works. I have a chapter on reincarnation and discussing how reincarnation might have been a part of many different religions, so that we just don't, it's not there now for reasons I discuss in the book. I'm sure you get that what it is nowadays, certain books are nothing near what they actually were. So yeah, the 10 Secrets of Awakening is based on 10 different secrets of what I believe to be the nature of reality, and how to empower yourself to reach higher states of consciousness.
So I'm going to have your link tree, but also the link to your book. By the time this comes out, it'll be available. And so people can click that link. And I can't wait to read it. And I can't wait to read it and then have you on again. We'll talk about it some more. Because what you're doing is great, man. Just keep on doing it. And I think you're awakening people and helping them with their suffering, and it's fun. You're bringing some fun to it. That's what's great. I relate that you talk about Star Wars and movies in relation to your stuff, because that's how I'm seeing the world, and you see the stuff, and it's cool. It's refreshing to see that. So thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah. I do my best to figure out what's going on here and relate it to things that I feel like are truth hidden in plain sight, like Star Wars, the Force. We think about the concept of the Force, like that kind of seems like the unified field. Kind of seems like these other things.
Is it midi-chlorians, or is it everybody has the Force? What's your...
Oh man, I don't want to get ripped by the Star Wars community. I mean, in our reality or in the Star Wars universe? I mean,
I sure hope it's not midi-chlorians, but if it is, everybody has midi-chlorians, right?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for our universe, just the Force is usable by anyone, and right. From the remote viewing stuff, it's pretty clear that you can develop these abilities. But it all starts with, are you open? Are you open to a new understanding of what's going on here? And I think you do a beautiful job of that, of exploring that. And that's why I really appreciate everything you do, because you open the minds of everyone and to see that there might be more going on than we know about. So thanks for having me on.
Well, yeah, man. And it's good to talk to somebody else that's thinking about this same stuff, because we're not all out there. If I start talking about this with certain people, their eyes are going to glaze over. So you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, dude. Likewise, you're the first person that I've talked to in a while
right,
that I can actually have a full conversation with, that understands what I'm saying. So
right.
It's great.
Yeah, no, I was talking to my daughter-in-law the other day, and so, tell me about the Law of One. Oh man, it didn't turn out well.
All right, because they're not ready. They think that they're, well, it's, some people are ready for sure.
You try to explain it, and then you're talking about channeling and how they got this, and by the
right,
so,
right,
yeah. Well, everybody check out the links I have, and thank you for coming on, and welcome to the Reality Revolution.
Thanks.